My name is Elena, I'm 32, and for the first time in my life I thought I was finally free. I had a winning ticket tucked into my drawer, numbers that promised a future untouched by their control. But freedom is never simple when you've been raised by people who believe everything you earn belongs to them. I can still hear the way my mother's voice cracked that night, not from pride or joy or even surprise, but from sheer hunger, like she had just spotted something she had always believed belonged to her. I had barely finished telling them that I'd won when she reached across the table, not even waiting for me to sit down properly, and she said, "So when do we get our money?" Not your money. Not congratulations. Not even a second to breathe in the air of what I thought was the biggest moment of my life. Immediately, the shift. Immediately, the grab. I remember blinking, thinking I must have misheard her, because my own chest was still tight with the joy of it, the kind of joy that burns so brightly it feels almost poisonous when it gets snuffed out too quickly. And my father, without missing a beat, leaned back in his chair, his face already hardening into the same mask he always wore when he spoke about anything financial, and he said, "Yes, don't waste it this time. This is ours. We need it more than you do." The words rolled out like a statement of fact, not a request, not even a demand in the way someone begs or pleads, but a cold claim of ownership. I had imagined that moment so differently. I had imagined tears in my mother's eyes, her telling me how proud she was, how she always knew I was capable of something big, even if she never said it out loud. I had imagined my father, stiff and stern as always, allowing a rare smile to break across his face. Instead, what I got was the hollow sound of their greed, echoing against the walls of the house I grew up in, a house that had never once felt like a sanctuary. "You'll bring it by tomorrow," my mother continued, as though we were discussing groceries, as though this was already settled. "Don't delay. The family's been waiting for something like this." She said the family, and suddenly I could feel the invisible weight of them all, the uncles and aunts and cousins who never once lifted a finger for me, pressing down on me in advance, already reaching out hands that had done nothing but take all my life. I remember trying to form words, my mouth opening and closing like I was drowning, like I had been pulled under just when I thought I'd finally broken the surface. My win, my victory, turned into a prize I was apparently holding in trust for them, a thing they had always assumed would return home to the rightful owners. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at them, the way their eyes glittered not with pride but calculation. The air between us had shifted so completely that it made my skin crawl. For years I had swallowed their dismissals, their criticisms, their endless reminders that I was nothing without their roof over my head. But in that moment, as my mother said, "It's only fair. We raised you. Now you take care of us." I felt something inside me break, not the clean break of glass shattering, but the slow, grinding crack of something giving way under too much weight. The joy that should have carried me for months, maybe years, was stolen in a single evening. My chest still burned with it, but poisoned now, like it had been laced with ash. I smiled weakly, nodded, and told them I'd think about how to divide it up, because I couldn't bring myself to fight them right then. I was too stunned, too blindsided. And when I left the table and went upstairs, closing the door quietly so they wouldn't accuse me of slamming it, I sat on the edge of my bed with the money's promise running circles in my head, and I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit for years: they would never see me as mine. They would never see anything I earned or achieved or fought for as mine. To them, everything was theirs by right, because I had been born in their house, because they had fed me and clothed me, because I was their daughter and therefore an extension of them, not a person in my own right. That night, the happiness that should have been pure turned into a quiet storm inside me, one that would grow darker and heavier every day that followed, until eventually it had only one way to be released. The next morning, before I even had the chance to clear my head or make coffee, my phone started buzzing. At first it was just my mother, her messages short and sharp. "When are you bringing it? Don't make us wait. This is important." But then came the calls from numbers I hadn't seen in years, numbers I didn't even recognize until I heard the voices, one after another, all weaving the same thread of entitlement through different tones. An aunt I barely remembered saying, "Sweetheart, you know your uncle's been struggling with his back, right? It would mean the world if you helped us out. After all, we've always been family, and family shares." A cousin I hadn't spoken to since high school chiming in, "Hey, congrats. That's amazing. So, listen, when can I swing by to grab my part? I know you wouldn't forget about us." And the worst, the absolute worst, was my father calling in the middle of all this, his voice already annoyed, as if I'd made them look bad by not moving quickly enough. Why are people calling me and asking what's going on? Why do I have to hear from others that you haven't given anyone their share yet? Do you want to embarrass us? Do you think it's yours to hoard? Each word landed heavy, not just because of what was being said, but because of what wasn't. No congratulations, no pride, no recognition of what it had taken me to get here. They spoke as if the only real story was the delay in delivering what was theirs, as if my hesitation was proof of greed, of selfishness. By the second day, my phone was a battlefield. Messages stacked up faster than I could delete them, each one a tiny dagger. "Don't be ungrateful. We sacrificed so much for you. Remember where you came from. Don't shame the family." The guilt was a living thing. It followed me from room to room, crawling up my spine at night so I couldn't sleep, curling around my chest when I tried to eat. I would stare at my plate, hearing their voices in the clatter of the fork against porcelain. How can you sit there and enjoy a meal while your family waits for you to do the right thing? I would wake up in the middle of the night with phantom vibrations from my phone, my body jerking awake, convinced that someone was calling me selfish, that another relative was waiting to remind me of the debt I owed. My own thoughts turned against me, replaying their words until I wasn't sure where their voices ended and mine began. There were moments when I almost believed them. After all, hadn't my parents kept a roof over my head? Hadn't they bought me school books, kept food in the fridge, paid the bills? Wasn't I, in some twisted way, in their debt? It was like every ounce of joy I'd earned was being measured against a lifetime of unspoken obligations, and the scales were always tipped in their favor. But here's the thing, it wasn't just about the money. I knew it, even if I couldn't admit it yet. It was about control. About reminding me that no matter what I achieved, no matter how far I thought I'd come, I would always belong to them. I would always be a resource to be tapped, a body to be bent, a prize to be displayed. One evening, after days of these calls and messages, I sat at my desk with my head in my hands, the screen lighting up again and again, relentless. I thought about turning the phone off, but even that felt impossible. What if my father showed up at my door, demanding to know why I was ignoring them? What if the silence only made them louder? And so I left it on, enduring every buzz, every ping, every reminder that I was not allowed to celebrate, not allowed to breathe without being told I owed someone else the very air in my lungs. The heaviest moment came late at night, when my mother sent me a single, cutting message that sliced through me more deeply than all the others combined. "Do you really want to be known as the daughter who abandoned her family after everything we did for her?" I stared at it for what felt like hours. I tried to think of a reply, something that would defend me, something that would explain that this was mine, that I had worked for it, that it wasn't theirs by right. But every sentence I started collapsed under the weight of that single accusation, selfish. Because that was the word they were really sharpening against me. Selfish. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I was hollowed out, too exhausted to even feel angry. I moved through the day like a ghost, pretending I didn't hear the buzzing of my phone, pretending I didn't see the messages piling up. But they were in my head, every moment, every breath. The joy of my win, the thing I had dreamed of, the thing that should have lifted me, was rotting inside me, curdling into heaviness, poisoned by their constant whispers. And I knew then, though I couldn't quite put words to it yet, that if I didn't find a way to reclaim this, to take it back somehow, it would never stop. They would take everything from me, and they would call it love. They would hollow me out, and they would call it duty. They would eat away at every spark I had left, until there was nothing left of me but their daughter, their possession, their wallet. I didn't tell anyone at first. Shame glued my mouth shut. The kind of shame that makes you feel like you're betraying your family even when they're the ones gutting you alive. For days, I carried the weight of their voices, the constant pull of their hands reaching for what was mine. I smiled when coworkers asked how I was doing, muttered, "Fine," into the phone when friends called, swallowed every word that might have betrayed the storm building inside me. But secrets rot faster when you keep them bottled. The guilt, the pressure, the relentless noise of their demands, it started to bleed into everything I did. My acting circle noticed first. We met every Thursday in this cramped, second-floor studio that always smelled faintly of paint and dust. Normally, those evenings were my refuge, a place where I could step into someone else's skin for a while and leave my own bruises at the door. But that week, I couldn't hold it together. We were running a scene, and halfway through I just broke. My lines came out flat, brittle, and then I was standing there with tears hot on my cheeks before I even knew I was crying. Everyone froze. The silence in that little studio was louder than any applause I'd ever dreamed of. "Okay," said Marissa, our unofficial leader, dropping her script onto the floor and walking toward me. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it cut straight through the mess of my emotions. "What's going on?" I wanted to wave her off, laugh it away, pretend I was just tired, but the words clawed their way out of me. "They want all of it. My parents. The whole family. They're calling it theirs." My voice cracked. "They're saying I owe them. That I'm selfish if I don't give it up." The others gathered closer, their faces a mix of shock and fury on my behalf. One of them, Devon, actually laughed, not the cruel kind, but the disbelieving kind that comes when you hear something so absurd it bends reality. "Wait. You won something, and instead of celebrating, they're shaking you down like you're an ATM?" Marissa sat beside me on the floor, her hand warm against my shoulder. "It's your money. Yours. They don't get to rewrite that." I shook my head, trying to explain, the words tumbling out too fast. "But they raised me. They keep saying it's only fair. That family shares. That I'd be nothing without them. And maybe they're right, maybe I do owe them." "No," Marissa cut in, sharp enough to stop me mid-breath. Her eyes burned in a way I'd never seen before. "Listen to me. Parents don't get to hold your dreams hostage because they fed you. That's the bare minimum. That's not a debt. That's their job. This?" She gestured around, to the scripts, the stage, the dream I'd been clawing toward for years. "This is you. You earned this." Something in her words cracked me open, and suddenly I was somewhere else entirely. A memory, vivid and raw, dragged me backward. 15 years old, standing in the kitchen with a flimsy flyer clutched in my hand. My heart pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. The flyer was for an acting workshop at the community center, something small, but to me it was everything. I remember holding it out to my mother, my voice trembling with hope. "Please, I want to do this. Just this once. It's only a few weeks. I'll do extra chores, anything." She didn't even look up from the dishes she was scrubbing. "Acting? Don't be ridiculous. You'll embarrass yourself. People will laugh." I tried again, desperation leaking into my voice. "But it's what I want. I feel." That's when my father's voice cut through, sharper, colder. "Stop wasting time. Pick something serious. A real job. This nonsense won't put food on the table." The words landed like a slap. I stood there frozen, the flyer trembling in my hands. My mother finally glanced at me, a smirk tugging at her lips. "You're not made for that kind of life, sweetheart. Don't humiliate yourself." Humiliation seared into me that day, a brand I carried for years. I remember tearing the flyer in half in front of them, the sound louder in my ears than their laughter. I remember swallowing the lump in my throat, promising myself I would never ask them again, never give them the chance to mock what I loved. The memory dissolved, and I was back in the studio, my chest heaving, my friends' faces blurred by tears. "That's who they are," I whispered, my voice ragged. "That's what they've always done. I should have known this would happen." Marissa squeezed my shoulder tighter. "Then stop letting them write your story. You finally have the power to choose. Don't hand it back to the people who spent years telling you that you didn't deserve it. The others nodded, their voices layering over each other. Devon leaning forward, eyes sharp. It's your dream. Your future. If you give in to them now, they'll never stop. Next time it'll be something else, and the time after that too. This is your line in the sand. I wiped my face, shaky but starting to breathe again. For the first time in days, I didn't feel alone in the storm. Their words pressed against the poison my family had been feeding me, not enough to erase it completely, but enough to remind me that another truth existed. And then, as the silence stretched, one of the quieter members of our circle, Alex, who rarely spoke but always listened, leaned forward with a sly smile. His voice was low, conspiratorial. You know, he said slowly, there are ways to teach people like that a lesson. Ways to make sure they choke on their own entitlement. Something sparked inside me at his words. A flicker of defiance, tiny but alive. I didn't know what he had in mind yet, didn't even know if I had the courage to imagine revenge. But the thought of it, the possibility of not just surviving their greed, but turning it back on them, set my blood humming in a way I hadn't felt since the moment I won. I didn't say yes, not then. I just looked at Alex, my tears drying into something sharper, something harder. And for the first time since my parents' demand, I felt the faint outline of a smile tug at my lips. Not joy, not yet. But defiance. The spark had been lit. The night after Alex's sly suggestion, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the familiar cracks in the plaster twisting into shapes I'd stared at since I was a teenager. Normally, those shapes calmed me, gave me something to anchor myself to when the house felt too heavy. But that night they seemed to mock me, like the ghosts of every no my parents had ever given me, every dream they had crushed before it could even take form. And then I thought of the flyer. The one I'd torn in half at 15. The way the paper had ripped down the middle, a clean line of surrender. For years I'd convinced myself I had done the right thing, that I had spared myself more humiliation by not fighting harder. But lying there, listening to my phone buzz yet again with another demand I didn't have the strength to read, I realized I had been wrong. That was the night I'd started giving myself away piece by piece. And here I was, years later, with my biggest win yet, still being told it wasn't mine. That realization hurt like hell. But it also cleared something in me, like scraping grime off a window and finally seeing what was outside. The next morning, I pulled up the website for the acting school I had bookmarked years ago but never dared to apply to. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the requirements. Essays. References. An audition tape. A fee that would eat a painful chunk of my winnings. For a second, the old voices rose up again. What if you fail? What if they laugh at you? What if your parents are right and you embarrass yourself? But then Marissa's voice cut through, the one from the studio, steady and fierce. Parents don't get to hold your dreams hostage because they fed you. That's the bare minimum. So I started filling out the application. Every keystroke was an act of rebellion. Every word of my essay was a middle finger to the years of dismissal and mockery. When I finally hit submit, my hands were shaking, my throat tight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the confirmation screen, my chest full of something I hadn't felt in years, hope that belonged only to me. Weeks crawled by. My parents' demands escalated, each conversation sharper, more insistent. My father barked about deadlines, my mother sighed dramatically about how she didn't understand why I was dragging my feet, and relatives filled the gaps with guilt-laden reminders of how much I owed them. But I had already begun to build a wall in my mind, brick by brick. With each rehearsal, each evening spent with my acting circle, I layered it higher, insulating myself from their noise. And then the letter came. A thick envelope, the kind you know means something. I held it in my hands like it might shatter. My fingers trembled as I tore it open, eyes racing over the words until I found the line that made everything inside me crack wide open. We are pleased to inform you of your acceptance. I sank to the floor, the letter clutched to my chest, tears pouring down my face. Not because I was sad, not even because I was relieved, but because I felt myself being stitched back together. This was it. This was the life I had dreamed of at 15, the one they had tried to kill before it could take root. And now it was real. Mine. When I told my friends, they screamed, hugged me, showered me in confetti from a party stash someone had in their bag. It felt like the celebration I had imagined from my parents and never received. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who saw me for who I was, something in me finally snapped into place. The next time my parents called, I didn't duck or delay. I answered, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been before. My mother immediately launched into her usual refrain, so? When will you bring us our share? People are starting to talk. And I cut her off. I don't owe you. Not anymore. Not ever. Silence. Long, jagged silence. Then my father's voice, low and dangerous. What did you just say? My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed firm. I said it's mine. You don't get to claim it. You don't get to claim me. I'm done. My mother gasped like I had struck her. My father sputtered, his words tripping over themselves in disbelief. Ungrateful. After everything. Do you want to shame us in front of everyone? Do you think you're better than your family? I closed my eyes, gripping the acceptance letter that lay on the desk beside me. No. I just think I'm finally myself. And you can't take that from me. I hung up before they could respond, my heart pounding like I'd run miles. For a moment, I thought I might throw up. But then the adrenaline settled into something deeper. A turning point. A clarity I had never felt before. That night, I sat with my friends, the acceptance letter in the middle of the table, and I said the words that had been building inside me for weeks. I'm choosing myself. I'm done letting them take everything. Marissa smiled, her eyes fierce with pride. Devin slapped the table so hard our drinks sloshed. And Alex, always calm, always calculating, leaned in again, his smile sly, the spark in his eyes brighter than ever. Good. Then let's show them what happens when they try to take what isn't theirs. And this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. I nodded. Because I was ready. The moment I told my parents, I don't owe you, I knew it wasn't over. People like them don't just back down when the leash they've held all your life finally slips from their hands. They tug harder. They yank. They claw until their nails break. And that's exactly what they did. For days after, the calls came like a siege, relentless, alternating between threats and sobs. My father's voice like gravel grinding against stone, telling me I'd regret shaming them, that I was cutting myself off from my own blood. My mother's voice softer, calculated, trying to wear me down with tears. You know we've sacrificed for you. You know it's only right. Don't make us beg in front of everyone. But the difference was, I no longer heard them as commands. I heard them as noise. Irritating, yes, but powerless unless I gave in. And with that acceptance letter pinned above my desk, with my friends behind me, I wasn't about to hand myself back to them. Still, Alex was right. Saying no wasn't enough. They had spent too long building their reputation on control, on boasting about what they extracted from their children, about the way their daughter would take care of them. I knew their type, they wouldn't just stew in silence. They would turn the story outward, spin it into a tale where I was the villain, the selfish daughter who abandoned her family. They would make sure the community pitted them, admired their endless sacrifice, shook their heads at how ungrateful I had turned out. So I decided to do something I never thought I'd have the courage for. I decided to humiliate them. Not through screaming matches. Not through bitter words. Through theater. My kind of theater. It started with a single line, delivered casually over the phone. My mother had called again, her tone syrupy this time. Darling, people are beginning to wonder. We've been telling them how generous you are. Don't make us look like liars. And I said, with a sweetness that nearly made me laugh, you're right. I think it's time I gave you your share. But not just to you. To everyone. We should make it a celebration. A family dinner. Invite whoever you want. The silence that followed was delicious. I could almost picture her face, the calculations spinning behind her eyes. A dinner, she repeated, uncertain but intrigued. Yes, I said brightly. I'll bring it in person. You can present it to everyone. It'll be perfect. By the time I hung up, I knew I had them. Because if there was one thing my parents loved more than money, it was the performance of having money. The spectacle. The chance to stand tall among relatives and neighbors, to bask in the glow of admiration. They would never turn that down. And I was right. Within hours, the group chat with extended family was buzzing. My aunt wrote, "So proud. Can't wait to see what she gives you." A cousin chimed in, "This will be legendary." Even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years started dropping hints about how excited they were. My parents, of course, fanned the flames. My father texted, "Our daughter knows her duty. She's not selfish like some thought. You'll all see." My mother added heart emojis, tagging half the family tree. It was nauseating and perfect all at once. With my friends, I began to plan. We met at a cafe, huddled in the corner like conspirators in some old spy film. Marissa kept tapping her pen against her notebook, grinning at every outrageous suggestion. Devin wanted fireworks, literal fireworks, until we reminded him this wasn't a movie. Alex, ever the strategist, outlined the details in a calm voice that made everything sound inevitable. "The key is the build-up," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "They need to believe right up until the last second that they're about to be rich. The bigger their anticipation, the harder the fall. That's where the satisfaction will be." And I agreed. Because this wasn't about taking money from them, they had already stolen enough of my joy for that. This was about taking their pride, the thing they weaponized against me for years. So we staged it carefully. I borrowed a sleek briefcase from one of Marissa's friends, the kind that looked heavy even when it was empty. I lined the inside with crisp white paper and slipped a single $10 bill into the middle. Then I wrote the note. Simple. Brutal. Sharp enough to cut, "This is exactly what you're worth." When I held the briefcase in my hands, I felt a surge of adrenaline. It wasn't just a prank. It was a performance, one I had been rehearsing for years without knowing it. Every humiliation, every dismissal, every demand, they had all been the opening acts. This would be the climax. The days leading up to the dinner were unbearable in their giddy anticipation. My parents called me constantly, their tone dripping with smugness. "We've invited the whole family," my mother bragged. "Even the neighbors. Everyone will see what a good daughter you are." My father chuckled, the sound of a man convinced of his triumph. "About time you did something right." I played my role perfectly, never letting my voice betray the storm brewing inside me. "Yes, of course. I can't wait. You'll be proud." Every word was a dagger I held behind my back, ready to plunge. By the morning of the dinner, the buzz had spread beyond family. Old neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me with thinly veiled curiosity. "We hear you're doing something big for your parents tonight. So sweet of you." I smiled at the screen, knowing what they'd be saying tomorrow. I rehearsed my own part too. The delivery. The solemn handoff of the briefcase. The calm exit before the explosion. It wasn't just revenge, it was art. And for the first time in my life, I felt like the director of my own play. When I finally zipped the case shut and placed it by the door, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But beneath the nerves, there was a clarity I'd never known before. This wasn't about cruelty. This was about reclaiming myself. By the time the car arrived to take me to my parents' house, I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. The sedan rolled to a stop in front of my parents' house just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of gold and purple. It should have been beautiful, but my chest was a furnace of nerves and adrenaline. Through the tinted windows, I could already see people gathering on the front lawn, neighbors mingling with relatives, the hum of chatter carrying into the street. Laughter floated in the air, not the light kind, but the self-satisfied kind, the sound of people who thought they were about to witness a performance of generosity. The briefcase sat on my lap, heavier than it had any right to be. I ran my fingers over the handle, steadying myself. This was it. No turning back. As soon as I stepped out, heads turned. A ripple of attention moved through the crowd. My mother was already at the door, dressed in her best silk blouse, her hair carefully curled. My father stood beside her, stiff-backed, chin lifted, radiating the smug authority of a man who believed the world was finally about to recognize his superiority. "My daughter," my mother called out, her voice carrying like a singer hitting her note. "She's here." She reached for my hand as if we were close, as if she hadn't been drilling guilt into me for weeks. Her grip was clammy, too tight, performative. I gave her the smile I had practiced in the mirror, calm, almost serene. I wouldn't miss it. The living room was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, platters of food laid out as though this were a wedding banquet. Phones hovered in hands, cameras already recording. My cousins whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between me and the briefcase. An uncle leaned over to another and muttered, not nearly quietly enough, "She better have brought enough." They raised her, after all. My father cleared his throat, raising his arms slightly as if conducting an orchestra. "Tonight," he began, "we celebrate what it means to be family. To raise a child who remembers her duty. To have a daughter who honors us with her success." Applause broke out, sharp and eager. I stood in the center of it, my skin buzzing, my breath steady. Then my father gestured to me. "The time has come." I stepped forward slowly, the briefcase in my hand like a sacred offering. Every eye followed me. Every camera tilted to capture the moment. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for the case, and my father, unable to contain himself, placed his hand over hers to help lift it. Together, they clutched it like treasure. And I said, voice solemn, perfectly rehearsed, "Everything you asked for is inside. Everything you deserve." A murmur rippled through the room. My parents' faces glowed. They set the briefcase on the dining table, their movements exaggerated for the crowd. Phones zoomed in. Necks craned. My father fumbled with the latches, his fingers eager, my mother's breath hitching audibly. Click. Click. The lock sprang open. The lid lifted. Silence. Inside, a single $10 bill lay on a pristine sheet of paper. And on top of it, the note, "This is exactly what you're worth." The gasp that tore through the room was almost operatic. A cousin stifled a laugh, which only made it worse. Someone near the back burst out, unable to hold it in, and soon the sound spread, laughter, nervous at first, then louder, crueler, the kind of laughter that snowballs because nobody wants to be the one left silent. My mother's face drained of color, then flushed an angry red. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came. My father snatched up the note, his eyes blazing, scanning the words over and over as if they might rearrange themselves into something else. "What is this?" he roared, his voice cracking under the weight of humiliation. But it was too late. The crowd had seen. The phones had captured. The mighty performance of the generous daughter and her proud parents had collapsed into farce. I stood there calmly, my hands folded, my breathing steady. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My voice didn't waver. "That's all you'll ever get from me." My mother lunged toward me, her voice shrill. "How dare you!" But I was already stepping back, already moving toward the door. "Enjoy your dinner," I said evenly, as laughter swelled again behind me. I didn't run. I didn't flinch. I walked out the door with my spine straight, the twilight air cool on my skin, my chest alive with something fierce and liberating. Behind me, I could hear my father shouting, my mother crying, relatives murmuring, neighbors chuckling, the chaos unraveling into pure spectacle. And I knew every phone in that room had captured it. Every shaky video would spread through the family grapevine, through the neighborhood, through every corner of their world that they had once ruled through pride and intimidation. The sedan door closed behind me with a satisfying click, sealing me away from the noise. As the car pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of the house in the rearview mirror, the crowd spilling onto the lawn, voices raised, laughter cutting through the night. I leaned back in the seat, my heart still pounding, my hands trembling now that it was done. And for the first time since that awful night when they demanded our money, I felt light. Not guilty. Not selfish. Free. The night of the dinner, I hardly slept. Not because of regret, there wasn't any, but because the adrenaline hadn't left my body. My hands still tingled from holding the briefcase, my ears still rang with the sound of laughter rippling through that room. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, reliving it frame by frame, like watching the perfect scene of a play unfold exactly as scripted. My parents' faces, the gasps, the silence, the burst of laughter. It was all burned into me, seared in a way I knew I'd never forget. By morning, the fallout had already begun. My phone lit up with messages, but they weren't the kind I had braced myself for. They weren't accusations, or guilt trips, or demands. They were commentary. A cousin sent a video, shaky but clear enough, my father flipping through the note again and again, his voice cracking as he shouted, "What is this?" The caption they'd added underneath said, "Well, that backfired," face with tears of joy. Another relative messaged, "Honestly, they had it coming. Always bragging about how much you owed them. Now everyone sees." Even neighbors joined in. One woman who used to whisper with my mother over the fence wrote, "Your parents never stop talking about what their kids should do for them. Seeing them get humbled? Chef's kiss." The clip began circulating quietly. Not viral in the internet sense, but viral in the community sense, shared through whispers, group chats, late-night snickering phone calls. By the end of the week, it felt like everyone had seen it. And here's the thing, my parents didn't post about me anymore. For years, their social media had been a constant stream of self-congratulation, twisting my smallest achievements into stories of their sacrifice. "Look at what we raised. All thanks to us." They lived for those posts, for the likes and comments that reaffirmed their status. But after the dinner, their accounts went silent. No photos. No captions. No boasts. Just nothing. The silence was louder than all their noise had ever been. When I walked through the neighborhood, I saw it in the way people looked at me. Not with pity, not with scorn, but with a kind of sly respect, like they knew what I'd done and admired the audacity of it. No one said it outright, but the glances, the smirks, the way conversations hushed when I passed, I knew. My parents, meanwhile, shrank. My mother avoided eye contact at the grocery store. My father stopped lingering on the porch where he used to hold court with the neighbors. They no longer strutted. They no longer bragged. They carried the weight of their humiliation in every hunched shoulder, every clipped word. And me? For the first time, I felt the air around me loosen. The constant pressure, the endless barrage of guilt and obligation, it was gone. Replaced by silence. Beautiful, blessed silence. Of course, there were a few desperate attempts in the days right after. My mother left me a voicemail, her voice trembling between anger and pleading. "How could you do this to us? Do you know what people are saying? You've ruined us. Please, just give us something, anything, to make it right." I didn't respond. My father tried once too, a single text that simply read, "Ungrateful. You'll regret this." I deleted it without a second thought. Because the truth was, I didn't regret it. Not for a second. I felt lighter than I ever had before. For years, their voices had filled every corner of my life, demanding, belittling, claiming. Now, there was only quiet. And in that quiet, I could finally hear myself think. The silence wasn't just absence. It was freedom. It was space. It was oxygen. I started using that oxygen to breathe life into the parts of me they'd tried to suffocate. My rehearsals became sharper, my focus clearer. I could spend hours at the studio without the constant buzzing of guilt in my head. For once, I didn't feel pulled in two directions, didn't feel the invisible chains tugging me back home. Every so often, someone from the family would try to reach out, a cousin fishing for gossip, an aunt hinting that maybe I should make amends. But their words bounced off me. They had seen the dinner. They had seen the briefcase. They had seen the note. And they knew, even if they didn't say it, that the balance of power had shifted. I wasn't the obedient daughter anymore. I wasn't the quiet, humiliated girl tearing up a flyer in the kitchen. I wasn't the ghost carrying guilt from room to room. I was the one who walked out calmly, leaving chaos behind. I was the one who wrote the ending. And as the silence stretched on, week after week, I realized that humiliation had done what years of pleading never could. It had finally shut them up. Acting school became the anchor I had been searching for my entire life. The acceptance letter that once trembled in my hands now sat framed on my desk, right beside the $10 bill from the briefcase. I had slipped the bill into the frame behind the glass, so that every time I looked up, I saw them both together, the dream I chose for myself, and the price I finally put on my parents' worth. Classes began in the fall, in a city far enough from home that I could breathe, yet close enough that the ghosts of my past still flickered at the edges. At first, I worried that the silence from my parents would somehow follow me, that they would suddenly reappear, louder than ever. But they didn't. Their absence became a steady rhythm, a kind of negative space that made everything else shine brighter. Walking into those rehearsal rooms felt like stepping into sunlight after years underground. The smell of sawdust and old curtains, the hum of voices warming up, the way people slipped into characters like second skins, it was intoxicating. For the first time, I wasn't ashamed of what I wanted. I wasn't begging for permission. I was here, living it. The first time I stood on stage during a workshop, I felt my 15-year-old self standing beside me, clutching that torn flyer, eyes wide with awe. I wanted to whisper to her, "We made it." They couldn't stop us. And with each passing week, the weight I'd carried for so long began to lift. My lines grew stronger. My voice steadier. I found myself laughing more, eating without guilt, sleeping without nightmares. The poison they had poured into me was slowly draining out, replaced by something cleaner, sharper. One afternoon, after a particularly intense rehearsal, I went back to my tiny apartment and pulled out the acceptance letter again. I sat on the floor with it spread out in front of me, the $10 bill framed beside it, and I cried, not from sadness, not even from joy, but from relief. Relief that I had survived them. Relief that I had chosen myself. Relief that the chain had finally snapped. My friends from the acting circle visited often, checking in, reminding me that I wasn't alone. They'd tease me about my performance at the dinner, joking that it was the greatest role I'd ever played. Oscar-worthy, Devin would say with a grin, and Marissa would nod, adding, "You didn't just act, you directed the whole damn play." At first, I laughed with them, brushing it off. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized they were right. That night wasn't just revenge. It was theater. It was me, finally in control of the script. I carried that realization into every rehearsal. Acting wasn't just about pretending to be someone else, it was about reclaiming power, about telling stories the way I wanted them told. And in a way, my parents had given me the perfect material. Every wound, every dismissal, every poisonous word, all of it became fuel. There was one moment, weeks into the semester, that sealed it for me. We were asked to perform a monologue that cut close to our real lives. I chose one about betrayal, about being silenced, about breaking free. When I finished, the room was silent. Then the applause came, thunderous, raw. And in that moment, I knew, I wasn't just healing. I was transforming. The $10 bill and the letter stayed framed together. They became my touchstone, the proof of everything I had endured and everything I had chosen. Some nights I would sit in front of them before bed, breathing in the quiet of my new life, and think, this is mine. All of it. Mine. And slowly, the scars stopped aching. The silence of my parents, once sharp and jarring, became background noise, like static you eventually forget is there. Their absence no longer felt like a loss. It felt like a gift. For the first time, I wasn't their daughter. I was myself. Months later, on an unremarkable evening between rehearsals, I found myself scrolling aimlessly on my phone. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just killing time. And then it appeared again, unprompted, like a ghost resurfacing, the clip from the dinner. Someone had posted it in a community thread, the caption reading, "Still the wildest family dinner I've ever seen." I hesitated before pressing play, my thumb hovering as if touching it might burn me. But curiosity won. The video was shaky, filmed from the corner of the room. My parents stood at the table, faces lit with pride, my father's voice booming as he declared, "The time has come." I watched myself step forward, calm and steady, the briefcase in my hand like an offering. Even now, months later, I could feel my pulse quicken, could remember the weight of that moment. Then came the opening of the case, the collective gasp, the note. Laughter erupting, sharp and uncontrollable. My parents' faces collapsing, their world cracking open in front of everyone. I didn't flinch this time. I didn't feel the sting of their anger or the ache of their betrayal. I watched it the way I would watch a play, detached, analytical, noting the beats, the timing, the rhythm of the scene. It was theater, pure and simple, and I had been both actor and director. The comments beneath the post were brutal. Legendary. She ended them with $10. Parents like that deserve worse. I scrolled through them without guilt, without hesitation. People had seen the truth. Not the version my parents would have spun, not the story of the ungrateful daughter abandoning her family, but the reality. They were greedy, entitled, and I had refused to play their game. I closed the video and leaned back in my chair, staring at the framed $10 bill and acceptance letter on my desk. They had become part of my daily ritual now, anchors in a sea that once threatened to swallow me whole. Whenever doubt crept in, and it still did, sometimes, late at night, I would look at them and remember, I had chosen myself. I had given them exactly what they were worth. Rehearsals were going well. My professors saw potential in me, more than I had ever dared to claim for myself. For the first time, the word future didn't feel like a question mark. It felt like a path, one I was walking with steady steps. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about that 15-year-old girl in the kitchen, the flyer trembling in her hands, her parents' laughter cutting her down before she even began. I thought about how close she had come to letting them bury her dream completely. And then I thought about the dinner, the briefcase, the laughter of an entire room turned against them instead. I realized then that the humiliation wasn't just theirs. It was mine too, but in reverse. For years, I had been the one humiliated, shrinking under their words, tearing up my own desires before they could breathe. That night, I handed the humiliation back, wrapped neatly in a briefcase, with a note that spelled it out plainly. This is exactly what you're worth. And the best part? I didn't need to repeat it. I didn't need to explain or justify or argue. The scene spoke for itself. The silence that followed was proof enough. Looking back now, I don't feel rage. I don't even feel triumph in the way I thought I would. What I feel is something quieter, steadier, detachment. Like closing the final page of a book that once consumed me and setting it back on the shelf. The story is over. The characters can't hurt me anymore. The viral clip will float around for years, I'm sure. People will stumble across it, laugh, shake their heads, move on. My parents will never live it down, not in their circles, not among the relatives they once lorded over. That's their cage to sit in, not mine. As for me, I've moved forward. I rehearse. I perform. I build a life brick by brick, not one borrowed from anyone else, not one stolen by guilt or obligation. My parents wanted to write my story for me, to cast themselves as the heroes and me as the dutiful child who would repay their every sacrifice. Instead, I gave them a role they never expected, the punchline. And I don't regret it. Not for a second. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at the framed bill, at the absurdity of it all. $10. That's all it took to turn years of control on its head. That's all it took to silence voices that had roared in my ears for as long as I could remember. I gave them exactly what they were worth. And for the first time in my life, I kept the rest for me. And that's where I left it. Their story ended in whispers and humiliation, and mine began in a rehearsal hall with nothing but a script and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. If you've made it this far, you've sat with me through every twist of the knife and every breath of freedom. Stories like this only matter because someone else hears them, someone else sees a reflection of their own hurt, their own longing for justice. So if it resonated, if you felt that twist in your stomach or that little flicker of satisfaction when the briefcase opened, let me know. Drop your thoughts, share your own story, tell me if you would have done the same or if you'd have gone even further. And if you want to hear more stories like this, raw, unpolished, dripping with the truth people usually swallow, stick around. Subscribe, follow, whatever button's in front of you. Because this wasn't the first time life handed me injustice, and it sure as hell won't be the last time I find a way to turn it into theater. Now it's your turn. Would you have given them more than $10, or would you have walked away with nothing at all?